Hey guys, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. So last week I prematurely promised everybody that I'd be ranking the last 10 Duke basketball teams at the beginning of the episode, but then I rambled for 30 minutes about the top 15 players of the 2020s and ran out of time to do that. So I am recording this literally immediately after I recorded last week's episode, but of course this one coming out on September 28th. So I'm actually going to rank the 10 seasons now. If there is some sort of big Duke news that happens, I'm going to interject it right here. Oh boy, what I'm about to say is going to sound really, really stupid. Literally 2 hours after I recorded this episode, Colin Kneppel committed to Duke. Out of the blue, out of nowhere. It is very clear that Jon Scheyer has a type when it comes to this class. Number 11 overall player Isaiah Evans, a 6'6" small forward. Colin Kneppel is ranked 16th by 24/7 Sports. He is a 6'5" small forward. And then, of course, Darren Harris, who is a 6'6" small forward. Man, somebody's going to have to explain the vision to me. That's three players playing the same position. They don't exactly do the same things, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to need the vision explained. I'll do a deeper dive on this in later weeks, more of a recruiting deep dive. I'll probably do that closer to countdown time when Cooper Flagg's recruitment really hits a peak. But man, is what I'm about to say. I'm going to keep it in too, because I'm keeping myself honest. I'm going to keep it in too. But man, is it going to look stupid. Colin Kneppel commits to Duke. And so if nothing just happened, you know that no big Duke news happened in the last 7 days, which it very well might not. It's September. It's not exactly busy season, but there's always recruiting stuff that could be happening. You know, Cooper Flagg's going to be on campus for Countdown to Craziness. His recruitment is at a very vital point. Colin Kneppel is visiting Duke. He'll probably make a decision. I think he already visited. He'll make a decision very soon between Duke and Virginia. Anticipate that will be Virginia. Maybe that's already happened. At this point, I would not guess that he'd go to Duke. Anyway, I'm not going to string everybody on any longer. I'm going to get into the ranking of the last 10 Duke seasons. So the last 10 Duke seasons will include every year from the 2013-14 season through the 2022-2023 year last season. And so I'll go ahead and get it started. Number 10 is a pretty obvious pick. I talked about it last week. It's the 2020-2021 team that missed the NCAA tournament, the COVID year. I talked a lot about how it's the easiest year to write off. You can't exactly write it off, but I mean, a group of largely freshmen and underclassmen, not a whole lot of returning talent, have to live in hotels. They're not used to the college experience. They don't get to practice in the exact same way. And that's just crazy difficult for a young team to deal with. And not only were they young, but games were getting canceled. Jalen Johnson quit the team 11 games into the season. That was supposed to be their best player. And they struggled with defining roles. The starting lineup was constantly changing. I mean, Patrick Tapé entered the lineup for like a game. The guard roles were constantly like who's starting at the guard position, who's the true point guard with Roach and Goldwire and even Stewart. And Wendell Moore wasn't living up to expectations. Mark Williams wasn't a polished product yet. Matt Hurt was killing it, but he needed some help. Defensively, he wasn't fantastic. Offensively, he was. And that team ends up losing a lot of games that it really should have won. Like that game against Pittsburgh. It showed glimpses of being that top 25 team that they were for the first couple weeks of the season, and like the blowout win against Clemson, games like that. But ultimately, they get thrashed by Carolina and the Dean Dome, and they go 11-11 in the regular season. Then they had a really solid showing there in the ACC tournament. They beat Boston College by a lot. Savarino, Worthington get to play in that game. Then they come in and beat Louisville. Mark Williams goes absolutely insane, gets everybody's hopes up for him as an NBA player and a really solid player for the next season. And Then they have a COVID case. And for the second straight year, COVID ends Duke's season. And, I'm not going to sit here and say that Duke team was going to win the ACC tournament. They were playing Florida State the next game. It was the 2 seed. Odds are they lose that game to Florida State. But if they don't, then the chances get a lot better with games against Carolina and Georgia Tech. It wasn't out of the question. It wasn't likely, but they weren't done yet. They do go 13-11. It is the worst Duke team in at least a quarter century since 95 at the least. It is. I mean, it has a claim as one of the worst teams under Coach K ever. But there's a lot more reasons for its struggle than a lot of other teams. Just the most historically insane. It is the most historically crazy season in college basketball. Plain and simple. I mean, the team only played 24 games. So that tells you what you need to know, really. At number 9, I have last year's team, 2022-23. And I went a little bit back and forth with this because in the last 10 years, Duke has only won the ACC tournament 3 times. And obviously, last year's team is one of those 3 teams to win it. But you got to look at the big picture. And in January, this was a team that was projected to be like a 9 seed. And that's not lost on me. They got a 5 seed, should have been a 4 seed. And they were a Final Four, favorite by the time the tournament rolled around because they were hot as fire, winning 10 straight games, and they looked fantastic. Hung a banner, all that. But don't let that distract you from the fact that they lost to Wake Forest in December. The fact that, I was there, I was in the student section. So I will never forget the absolute embarrassment that happened in PNC Arena. I mean, that normally happens, but this past year's was even worse than usual. Things like that happened. They, got manhandled by Purdue. That game against Kansas, I truly believe every team I'm ranking above this team, the 8 teams that I'm going to rank above them, if they had played that same Kansas team and that Kansas team had played the exact same way they played, all 8 of those teams would have won against Kansas last season. 100%. Even at the beginning of the year, they would have won. 100%. There's growing pains, and I understand that. And I don't want to rag on last year's team because I think what they did was impressive, and they wonderfully set up the Shire era, and they did incredibly well considering everything. The fact that you only had 2 returning players, 1 returning rotational player. And I think it's incredibly impressive what they did. Hanging a banner for the ACC Tournament Championship was fantastic for them. But ultimately, I do think that the other 8 teams are better. And that's just a testament to the standard at Duke. The fact that the ACC Tournament champion last year is only the 9th best team in the last 10 years at Duke. That is the lowest seed Duke has had in this time span in the NCAA tournament, a 5 seed. Outside of course, missing the tournament, and team that they're better than. But they should have been a 4 seed. And the next team on my list was actually a 4 seed. The 2015-16 Duke team, I've got 8th. So Grayson Allen was absolutely nuclear that season. That was Grayson Allen in his most prime, his best form, honestly, because he was fearless. He was driving to the basket with reckless abandon and using his athleticism. After all the tripping incidents and everybody from everywhere online and in person coming at that young man with so much hostility caused him to become a more reserved player, that he no longer played with the edge and the physicality that he played with. He was restricted to a 3-point shooter as an upperclassman. And that's why he regressed as a player as an upperclassman. But that sophomore version of Grayson Allen was the best version of his game that we've ever seen. And he was great. Brandon Ingram was fantastic. Luke Kennard really showed a lot of signs of greatness in that season. Marshall Plumlee was really solid as a big. Some people won't want to admit it, but he was. And that team picked up some really huge wins. They beat number 1 seed Virginia at the buzzer. They beat number 1 seed Carolina at the buzzer as well. Derek Thornton blocked Joel Berry. But I think it's a lot of the role players just weren't up to par. I think there wasn't a whole lot of veteran leadership on that team past Plumlee and Matt Jones, because Emil Jefferson got hurt early in the season. He was supposed to play that role, and I think things would have gone a lot differently if Jefferson had been there the whole year. Chase Steeder doesn't really pan out. Thornton doesn't pan out quite the way you wanted him to. things became more difficult. They lost some games in the middle, a lot of games in the middle of the season. At one point, losing 3 in a row and 4 out of 5 in conference play that took them out of the top 25. They end up being a second weekend team, which is not what I thought would be the case coming into the tournament. But they did it, and they made it to the second weekend. They were a 4 seed. They had some skill, but I obviously can't put them any higher than I just have. So they come in at 8.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network or DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
I did a lot of thinking about these next 2 teams, a whole lot of thinking. And I really went in and analyzed their schedule. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce both of them at the same time. Ultimately, I went at number 7 with the 2013-14 Duke team. They were 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, lost to Mercer, but made it to the ACC tournament championship, had National Player of the Year runner-up Jabari Parker. And then at 6, I'm going with 2019-2020. At ACC Player of the Year, Trey Jones didn't get a postseason. For a while, I had 14 at 6, 2014 team at 6, and the 2020 team at 7. I ultimately decided to switch them because I realized that I was holding the fact that 2020 didn't have a postseason against them. I was like, well, 2014 made it to the, tournament championship. Then I was like, and then I was also using the other argument for 2014 that I was like, well, I can't hold 2014's loss to Mercer against them because 2020 doesn't really even have anything from the tournament anyway. So I should really just isolate the regular seasons. And so ultimately I did that. And if you isolate the regular season, both of these teams are 3 seeds. They're both 3 seeds. And I think the thing that really was weighing down 2020 in my brain at first was that loss to Stephen F. Austin. They lose at the buzzer to Stephen F. Austin. It was the first non-conference home game that Duke had lost in 20 years, which was huge. That Duke team also blew like a 10-point lead in a minute and a half or 2 minutes or something crazy like that to Wake Forest, lost at Wake Forest, lost to a not so great Virginia, or not as good Virginia team as you would have liked to have lost to. Got throttled by State, although like what team doesn't? And PNC, what Duke team doesn't lose in PNC? But, and I was thinking, the 2014 team didn't have that. But then I realized, well, yeah, they did. 2014 lost to Wake Forest. They didn't lose to a Stephen F. Austin, but they only won by a point against Vermont. And then I think they only won by like single digits against ECU. You can fact check me on that as well, but I'm pretty sure that's true. They had some rough games, and I don't think they had the wins. The 2020 team beat Kansas, who was the number 1 overall seed in the tournament by most metrics probably at the end of that regular season. They beat Florida State, who was probably on track to be a number 1 seed that season. Duke beat Syracuse, who would have been in 14, who would have been a 1 seed most of that year, but ended up being the same as they were, a 3 seed. And outside of that, they didn't really have any other crazy wins. They beat a ranked Michigan team, and most of their losses weren't really bad losses. They avoided losing to Vermont, things like that. But that could have been a much worse season than it was. And they lost to Mercer in the first round. And they weren't peaking at the end of the season at all. I wouldn't say that. 2020 kind of was, although that was a bit of a deceptive peak. A lot of people like to say that team was going to the Final Four for sure. I mean, every fan base says that about the 2020 season. Duke fans had reason to believe that, and it's because of the emergence of Justin Robinson and what he was going to do. He reminded a lot of people of Brian Zuback in 2010 and what he was able to do for that team as an emerging starter. Robinson really could have played a big role like that, and I think it's a huge shame that he didn't get minutes earlier in his career. But ultimately, people do forget that like a week or two before they get those wins over State and Carolina at home, that they were losing to Wake and Virginia. Things were not hunky-dory a week or two prior to that. And so there were a lot of reasons to doubt that team was going to make a Final Four run. I actually think it was way more likely they lost in the first weekend than made it to the Final Four. But I really did think that team could have made it anywhere in the tournament. But because of that unpredictability, they were difficult to match up with the 14 team. but I gave them the nod. I went for the nod. I said, I don't know. There's something about that duo of Jones and Carey. So 7, 2014, 6, 2020. And at 5, I've got 2016, 2017. Again, only one of 3 teams to win the ACC tournament, and they were a 2 seed, only 5th. But they also, at a point, and I believe this is right, dropped out of the top 25, which is even wildly even more impressive that they end up getting a 2 seed. They got a 2 seed after dropping out of the top 25 at a point. And how crazy is that? You know, they lost 3 straight games at a point. They lost to NC State in Cameron, the only team on this list to do that. And man, they messed up a lot, but they also beat Carolina, the eventual national champion, twice. And they picked up a lot of really big marquee wins. And that team was really solid and had so much fight, so much resolve to win the ACC tournament. And they remind me just of a better version of last year's team. They were just a more talented version of last year's team because they didn't lose in a more talented ACC because they lost about, roughly the same number of games, close to, not the same, but roughly, I think. But they end up with the 2 seed. Last year's team ends up with the 5 seed, both ACC tournament champions that were out of the top 25 for portions of the year. Obviously, last year's team was out of the top 25 for longer. But because the ACC was better, they were able to work their way back into a 2 seed. Ultimately, they both go out the same way. They lose to a really tough physical SEC team in the round of 32. And it's because of that first weekend exit and their regular season struggles for a while that the team that had Jason Tatum on it ends up with only a 5th on this list. In 4th, I've got the 2017-2018 team. This team was I think they were an 11-0 team before they lost. Their first loss was at Boston College, which was kind of an odd first loss. But they had a lot of character, man. They had a lot of fight in them. They didn't lose easy. They beat number 2 Michigan State with a just stupid performance from Grayson Allen. Dude went insane on them. They win 2 huge comebacks in the PK80 tournament to beat Texas and Florida in back-to-back days, which was wildly impressive. It was at that point that I thought that team could have won. That team had one of the best starting lineups of any Duke team ever. Trayvon Duval, Grayson Allen, Gary Trent, Wendell Carter, Marvin Bagley is one of the best starting lineups in Duke basketball history. The bench was shallow. Marquise Bolden wasn't as good as he probably should have been at the time. He had his glimpses. But then Delorier, O'Connell, Goldwire. It was a really shallow bench. And that's a lot of the reason why they lost games, because these guys didn't get breathers, and ultimately 4 of them were freshmen. They made mistakes. Bagley didn't make a lot of them, but they made mistakes. And they pick up some big wins. They beat Carolina. They also lose a really weird game to St. John's. They lost a lot of close games where the ball, I always thought Gary Trent was such a clutch player at Duke. And I know that there's always kind of the tendency to want to give the veteran the ball at the end of games. And so that's why Grayson Allen always got the last shots. But he really just wasn't making them that year. And I would have given the ball to Trent. I would have gone to Gary Trent in late game scenarios. And that might, you could say if the ball went to Trent at the end of the Kansas game, maybe Duke went to the Final Four. But then again, Grayson Allen took a heck of a shot that was a centimeter away from going in and sending this team to the Final Four. I mean, they were so close. And it was a great team. It was a fantastic team with the ACC Player of the Year, first team All-American Marvin Bagley. But they fell just short of the Final Four. At 3, I've got the 2021-22 team, Coach K's last team. This was an incredibly talented team that lost very few games by very few points. They blew like a 14-point lead at the half against Ohio State that they should not have lost that game. They lost by like a point on the road at Florida State in a game they absolutely shouldn't have lost. By like 2 points or something like that against Miami at home. Absolutely should not have lost that game. Lost at the buzzer to Virginia at home. Absolutely should not have lost that game. Honestly, the game that they lost most thoroughly in the entire regular season was the final game against Carolina in Cameron. And that's a game that you really felt like they should have won. But, with all the pressures around that game, it's easy to see why they didn't. And they bounced back from losing that game and make it to the ACC Tournament Championship, catch a red-hot Virginia Tech team. What are you going to do with Hunter Couture in that game? Go to the tournament. They're the only team in the 2020s to make the Final Four. They make a Final Four run with some very impressive wins. That Texas Tech team was really good. Beating them was incredibly impressive, beating Arkansas, beating Michigan State. First Final Four team in 7 years. Coach K's last Final Four team, and a Final Four in his last season. I know we like to talk about the fact that his last game was a loss to North Carolina. Carolina fans will love to bring that up, and it's true. It's absolutely true. His last game was a loss to North Carolina, but also the fact that he made the Final Four in his last season. I mean, how many coaches really get to say that? That they announce their retirement before the season and then make the Final Four is very impressive. And that team was very good. And honestly, I think it was their youth that caused them to lose the games that they did lose. They should have had a lot less losses than they did have. A stacked and incredibly talented roster led by Paolo Banchero. Wendell Moore made a huge jump that season. Mark Williams made a big jump that season. Jeremy Roach was fantastic and really came into his own in the NCAA tournament and became the player that he is today and is still improving upon. But Trevor Keels and AJ Griffin were great in the fact that they weren't even part of the top 3 players and how good they were. That team was just, it was stacked, it was loaded, and it was a Final Four team, and it's right below one team that wasn't a Final Four team, and that's the number 2 team, 2018-2019, the unequivocally 100% the best Duke team of all time that did not make the Final Four. I don't think I'd ever been more confident, besides maybe the team that's ranked above this one, of a team that I was like, this team's going to make the Final Four. I just thought it was a foregone conclusion. They were just stupid good. And then it was just reaffirmed when they smeared Kentucky all over the hardwood in the first game of the season. That team had the greatest 4-man freshman group that has ever been assembled with Williamson, Barrett, Reddish, and Jones. It was just, I mean, talent-wise was incredible. But the talent, but the drop from the 4th guy to the 5th guy was wild. The drop from Reddish or Jones, whoever you thought was the 4th guy on that team, to Delorier and Bolden and White was like, man, wow. Like I don't want to rag on Delorier, Bolden, and White. They played great roles on that team and great roles while they were at Duke and have all played in the NBA. But it was difficult. There's a lot of pressure on 4 freshmen's shoulders that season, and everybody just kind of expected them to win the national championship. It's the only team on this list to be the number 1 overall team at the end of the regular season. They win the ACC tournament. Zion Williamson is the National Player of the Year, the first player to win National Player of the Year in 13 years at Duke. Williamson is maybe one of the greatest college basketball players of all time. RJ Barrett literally has the 2nd highest scoring single season in Duke basketball history and isn't even the best player on that team. He was the National Player of the Year runner-up. Zion's not there. He's the NPOY. Heck, I think USA Today named him National Player of the Year just to be contrarian. This team was ludicrous. And then the tournament happens. I mean, heck, even most of their losses in the regular season can be chalked up to injuries. They lose twice to Carolina. Well, Zion didn't play. They lose to Syracuse. It's like, oh, Trey Jones and Cam Reddish didn't play that game. They lose to Virginia Tech. Oh, Zion didn't play that game. Gonzaga is the only time they had everybody healthy for. The only loss that everybody was healthy for the whole season, leading up into the NCAA tournament. And then they win with ease in the first round, and then every Duke fan has a collective heart attack watching them play Taco Fall and UCF, Aubrey Dawkins in the second round of the tournament. The luckiest I've ever seen a team get with the miss on the layup and the putback was just wild. At the end of that game, they get lucky enough to win that game. When that happened, I was thinking this team has luck on its side. It has luck. It has everything on its side. They're going to finish this job. And they get the same lucky break on the lob miss for Virginia Tech the next game. I'm like, it's destiny. It's destiny. This team is confirming everything I've ever believed. Not winning in the way they should win. Absolutely not. Somehow, RJ Barrett misses a free throw and they lose, which, by the way, in my time watching Duke basketball to that point, I don't think I'd ever seen Duke lose to Michigan State. And they lose to Michigan State by a point in the Elite Eight. And just all the players were distraught. I mean, watching Trey Jones' reaction, he was absolutely distraught. And it was unbelievable. And it was heart-wrenching for that team because The three teams in the Final Four were, they would have been playing Texas Tech the next game, who they had beat. On the other side, Virginia, who they beat twice, hadn't lost to them, and Auburn, who they had beat. They were 4-0 against the other three teams in the Final Four. But they lost to Michigan State. And they weren't playing their best basketball at the end of the year. They're dealing with injuries. Cam Reddish had, I think, missed the Sweet 16 game, and he wasn't fully healthy in the Elite Eight. We're always dealing with those injuries, and there was a lot of pressure on four guys' shoulders. But man, would you like to have had a Final Four for that one? If you're a Duke fan, obviously the number one team is 2014-15. Argument could be made. 18-19 was better on paper in some ways, but that Duke team only lost 4 games, right? 35-4. I think that's the best record a Duke team's had in a long time. That a Duke team had in a while. At this point, it's been like over 2 decades, or probably over 2 decades, since a Duke team's performed that well. And I had a feeling preseason with that team, very similar to the 2019 team, where it was like, oh, Final Four's in Indianapolis. It's the Apples thing. Duke can only win a championship in a city ending with Apples. That's why 15 and 19 both look great on paper preseason. And then also, I watched that team in the open practice in 2015, and I was like, yeah, this team's going to win the national championship. I knew how good Kentucky was. Truly, I did. But I just knew. And I watched them for a little while, and it's like Okafor was so good. Quinn Cook was such a natural leader. Tyus Jones was a fantastic floor general. Justice Winslow played the role of the defender really well. And I think once they figured out that inserting Matt Jones into the starting lineup significantly improved how good of a defensive team that group was. They came into the tournament, they got the right route. And when they matched up with Wisconsin, I think a lot of people thought Wisconsin was going to win because they just beat Kentucky. But I like this team against Wisconsin. Grayson Allen has the game of his life, and they won the national championship. And it's like, it wasn't a surprise to me, but it was one of the greatest Duke teams of all time. It is without question Duke's best team post 2010. Not even a debate, I don't think. And it's, the most recent championship. And, Duke's never gone, since they won the first, they've never gone more than 9 calendar years without winning a national championship. And this season marks the 9th calendar year since it happened. So if history repeats itself, this Duke team will win the national championship. And in a year, we'll come back and we'll reevaluate this list, see where the 2023-2024 team falls on this list, see how they match up with 2015. But thanks for listening, as always, guys. Let me know how you would rank them if you disagree with me in any way. I'm sure a lot of you might. I'm wrong a lot. But thanks for listening so much, guys. Make sure you follow and like the podcast wherever you're listening. Make sure you share it, and keep on listening, because I'm going to keep on talking. So I'll talk to you guys next week, and thanks so much for listening.